Sure. I'm Randy Barnett. I'm the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Legal Theory at the Georgetown University Law Center, where I also direct the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. You're asking me a question that I don't really have a pat answer to. I went to Harvard and I hold the views I hold, which I've already stressed are not the same as what the views all the justices hold about the law. And I know a lot of people who went to Harvard and Yale who would agree with me, and there's people who agree with them. So I don't think that's the problem. I think that it isn't where they're drawn from. I mean, when people complain about this, they say, well, there used to be governors and former senators and politicians. We don't need that. I mean, that doesn't strike, people who would understand politics. I don't think we need more people on the court that understand politics. I don't think that's what's missing. The problem is, if there is a problem, it's the narratives that these justices, that the particular people who become justices subscribe to, and this is true generally. There's a left side of this narrative, there's a right side of this narrative. It's not limited to people who are on the Supreme Court. It's part of the legal culture that I exist in. It's part of the more public intellectual culture of left and right that I also exist in as a blogger and as somebody who writes op-eds and who gives a lot of talks around the country. I'm bumping heads with conservatives just as I'm bumping heads with progressives. This is just the way it is. And so the only way to ultimately address that is to prevail in the realm of ideas and eventually to prevail in the political realm, assuming the political realm is allowed to operate. And then, through the process we discussed earlier, will the views reflected by the president and by the Senate and then by the court change in the way that I would like to see them change. They're not going to change really much before that. Although I do think it's true that to some degree the justices will somewhat follow the election returns, in the sense that if there is a big tidal wave of popular sentiment in one direction, they tend to follow that. And if that direction were to favor me, they would tend to follow that too. And so I think that could happen really quicker than replacing the whole court. But I don't think the problem is the insularity problem that I've heard others complain about. I think, look, I think we have an extremely talented Supreme Court. It's not always been the case, I think, that Supreme Court justices have been as smart and as capable and as hardworking and as articulate as the justices are today. Boy, I don't think you can fault this Supreme Court for lack of ability. That's not in any way, shape, or form. I just disagree with some of the judicial stances that they take about the Constitution, but I certainly don't criticize their training and their expertise. It's ultimately political. I mean, this is what law professors have called popular constitutionalism. And I think there's a lot of truth to this popular constitutionalism business, but it's not because I believe, as I think some want to suggest, that the actual meaning of the Constitution changes with the politics. What changes is Supreme Court doctrine, or what you might call constitutional law. So maybe let's explain it this way. You've got the Constitution over here. The meaning of that does not change according to politics. You have constitutional law over here, some of which is based on interpretation, but most of which is constitutional construction. This is a function of politics. Popular constitutionalism, you might say. It does evolve. It is alive. Its living constitutionalism is over here, where constitutional law is being done. It's the Constitution over here that shouldn't be changed or ignored. And so ultimately, it's what's going to happen in our system, the way our system has been set up, is it's going to be political. Right. So, I mean, but to say something is ultimately, to say that the direction of the court is ultimately going to be dictated by politics is not to say that it has nothing to do with justice, what we talked about at the beginning of this interview, or principle. to say that to imply that it does means politics is nothing but interest group preferences. You know, I want this, I vote for this. You want that, you vote for this. But that's not what politics has to be. It can be that way. In fact, the legislative process oftentimes is that way. It can also be a matter of principle. And you have what you might call conviction politicians. And you've always had them in our history. And you have conviction political actors. Martin Luther King comes to mind, just the first one that comes to mind. But another guy who I've been doing a lot of work on lately is Chief Justice Salmon Chase, who is, you know, always accused of being politically ambitious, but he was a conviction politician whose #1 mission was the abolition of slavery in the United States. And everything he did was connected up to that principle, even though he was also pursuing his own personal ambitions at the same time. So these two things are not incompatible. You can both have a political system, but that system can be moved by big principles, by appeals to justice, not just appeals to interest. And that's what I think is necessary, I think, for the politics to take the direction I would like to see it go. And that's what I see the connection is between principles in the abstract, the rights that are retained by the people, and the political process that's necessary, the way we have it set up, the political process that you have to operate within in order to get justice for everyone. Oh yeah, well it's not part of the political process. It's insulated from, and by political process we mean partisan Democrat-Republican process. It's insulated more or less from that. But going back to what I said before, look, the justices are human beings. They are not gods. They are human beings, which means they're going to be and I'm a human being. I'm influenced by the culture around me. I'm influenced by who's up and who's down. Go to a stadium and watch a football game, and if it's the home and the home, suppose the visiting team has, you know, intercepted the ball and scored 2 touchdowns right away. You have 80,000 people in the stadium sitting on their hands not doing anything. They're not yelling, they're not screaming, they're dead silence. And until the home team does something, they won't come alive. We're all influenced. And I've been in those crowds. I'm sitting there going, You know, like, we're all influenced by what's going on around us. And so it's not just political, it's social as well. And that's just the way the human life is. That's true. They're supposed to resist majoritarian desires to do things that are not according to the rules of the Constitution. They're supposed to resist that. That's their job. I think that they have done that in the past. They don't do it as often as I would like to see them do it, but they have done it because they view their mission as to a higher calling, which is to the law. Or to the Constitution itself, as opposed to politics. That's why I'm not loving to see governors and senators on there, because I don't think that they view their mission the same way as a justice does, even out of the culture that we have. So yes, they're supposed to do that. All I'm saying is there's a limit to what you can expect them to do, because they're only people, and they get influenced by what's going on around them like everybody else does. And that's what our history has shown. They've done it up to a point, but they can be faulted for not doing it better. But on the other hand, we can understand why they didn't do it better, because they're only human. I'm not somebody who thinks that progress is inevitable. I think that you can go back and you can regress. We've had a long progressive arc, and therefore we think we're on some kind of historically inevitable timetable, and I don't think that's true. I actually think we can screw it up, and it could be all gone eventually. So I wish I could be that kind of. I'm an optimist in the sense that I think that as long as we're allowed some modicum of liberty, that the forces of liberty can eventually prevail. But I also believe that there has always been and will always be forces who wish to control people, and then there will always be a desire for security that would cause some individuals, in fact many individuals, to put their faith in leaders who actually are more interested in control and to give up their liberties. So I don't think the battle for liberty will ever be entirely won, because I think there's a perpetual clash between liberty and security that will always cause the forces of power to exist and to always fight back. All we can do is keep the flame of liberty alive. Even though I do think that it's possible for that flame to go out, I'm optimistic that we'll keep it alive.